Hi, I'm Colin.
And I'm Phil.
We're the hosts of Science Fiction 101.
It's a show which gets to the heart of science fiction. Books, films, TV. We've covered Star Trek,
Doctor Who,
Star Wars.
We love to explore the past, present, and future of science fiction.
And we'd love for you to join us
on Science Fiction 101.
Hi, Colin.
Hi, Phil.
So here we are once again, 2025, and it's our annual Let's Review the Short Stories Nominated for the Hugos episode. And that means we have 6 short stories to review. Sometimes people ask, why don't you review the novels that have been nominated? Well, have you tried to read 6 novels in a podcast that's on once a month? How would you feel about that, Colin? I understand you are reading them because you're voting in the Hugos.
Yeah, so I did this last year, and I read I read everything in all the major categories. I read some of the young adult categories, and I read some of the related works. And it is a task because there are, like you said, there are 6 novels, 6 novelettes, 6 novellas, 6 short stories. And so it occupied months and months of my free reading time last year.
And all I do is read the ones that you hear about on the podcast, folks. So I've not bought a membership for the WorldCon. So my only motive for reading these is to keep current with the field a little bit, but without the effort of reading 6 novels. A couple of comments from listeners from previous episodes responding to things that we said. Sue wrote, I share Phil's distaste for being in movie theatres or anywhere with children. Okay, Sue, you've extrapolated a bit from a comment I made. I don't mind children, but I don't like going to the cinema at 11:25 in the morning to see a movie. Sue says, imagine my dismay in The Little Mermaid when I thought I'd chosen a safe screening time, but was tragically wrong. Oh yes, I can imagine that. And then we had a couple of comments about the cat quiz. Sue says, I did beat Colin on one of the questions, the author who created the Kazinti, and I'm still laughing about David Niven, because Colin, you said David Niven when you meant Larry Niven.
I'm sure that David always wanted to be an author.
Yes, and in fact, I posted on Facebook that his autobiography is called The Moon's a Balloon. So, that sounds like a science fiction book or a fantasy book.
It does.
Yeah. We also heard from Andy, and he said, obviously a great episode, obviously, but I do have a slight complaint about the quiz, this being the cat quiz. He says, it lacked a red dwarf question. And he's absolutely right. I didn't think of Cat from Red Dwarf. I should have done. Do you know Red Dwarf, Colin?
We've discussed it over the years, and I know that it's a science fiction franchise from the UK, but that's about it.
So if I put in a question about the cat, would you have any idea what I meant?
Probably not. Although maybe in the realm of expanding my knowledge of science fiction and our listeners' knowledge, if you're in the United States, maybe we should talk a little Red Dwarf sometime.
Okay, maybe we should. Okay, shall we discuss the Hugo-nominated short stories?
Yes.
6 stories here. 2 of them are from Lightspeed magazine, and 3 of them are from Uncanny, and 1 of them is from Clarkesworld. So, an interesting distribution there. We've reviewed Clarkesworld, and I think we've reviewed Uncanny before, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we've ever done Lightspeed.
Well, November and December and January do come up every year, so...
So, let's go through these stories one at a time then. The first one I've got on my list is 5 Views of the Planet Tartarus by Rachel K. Jones. This is from Lightspeed. And I see Rachel Jones is from Portland, Oregon.
She is.
Do you know her?
No, unfortunately, I don't know her. She must be like on the other side of the street from me or something.
Of course. She is a previous nominee for the Hugo, the Nebula, the Locust, the Bram Stoker, and the World Fantasy Award, and she works as a speech-language pathologist, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if that has anything to do with the story. Colin, it's a very short story, this one.
So when you say it's a short story, you mean it's a short story. It's
Mm.
549 words. So, Five Views of the Planet Tartarus is a story about an advanced futuristic civilization with a novel method of incarcerating and punishing criminals. That is the briefest summary I can give of it. Very similar to Rachel K. Jones' story from last year, which was nominated for the Hugo Best Short Story, "The Sound of Children Screaming." This is kind of horrific. So what we do is we follow the life of one of these criminals as they are taken to the planet Tartarus, processed for incrimination, and then left for eternity in orbit around the planet, where they vainly hope that the next shuttle, which comes in 10 years, will hit them and knock them out of orbit and cause them to burn up in the atmosphere.
It's pretty bleak, isn't it? As it turns out.
It is.
I mean, it starts out bleak because I think we know fairly soon that the reason they're going to Tartarus is for their punishment, although we don't really know what they've done. And they're kind of found, I suppose, ceremonially guilty because the impression's given that they're not, they don't receive a fair trial. They're just sort of processed. And they have nanobots pumped into them. Their voluntary motor control is taken away from them by severing their nerves. So yeah, it's pretty grim. And yet, it's very brief. So I quite liked it for its brevity, and I quite liked the kind of circularity of the story, because the ending is very similar to the beginning, but with the twist that we now know why they're there.
Yeah, the context of a quote from the shuttle pilot comes around full circle, which I particularly enjoyed.
And I bet you we've used more than 549 words to describe this story.
Quite possibly. Yeah.
So perhaps we should move on. I mean, my summary notes are short, simple, inevitable, clever, and dark.
I would agree with all of that.
The next one I've got is We Will Teach You How to Read. We Will Teach You How to Read, which is by Caroline M. Joachim. This is from Lightspeed again. And Joachim is a previous nominee for Hugos and Nebulas, born in Hawaii and now resident in Seattle. So what's going on here? This is the Pacific Northwest contingent leading the Hugo list here.
All the hometown favorites are being nominated, I guess.
Yeah, because the Worldcon is in Seattle. She has a master's degree in child psychology. And now this one is really hard to describe. I'll have a go. It's the story of some alien species who are actually trying to tell us their story, and they repetitively detail what their story is. And they say this over and over again, they say that their story is life, loss, transformation, love, death, iteration. I would say that sentence is repeated endlessly throughout the story, but it's not actually a sentence, it's a list. And it appears more as a column of text. And when you see this laid out on the page, it's all done in columns. And sometimes there's just the one column, then there's two, then there's three. There's one page where it's sort of 5 columns wide.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that they're telling us this information simultaneously in multiple voices, and they somehow require us to take this information in while recognizing that we probably can't. Oh, and it seems that they're probably not long for this world. They probably want to pass on the information about themselves before they become extinct. They're kind of desperate to pass the story on. And they evidently place a great value in storytelling. And they repeatedly tell us that they are read to by their parents, they read alone as adults, and they read with their own children. And it seemed to me that that was part of their story that perhaps echoes our human experience more than anything else that they say, apart from the list of things: life, loss, transformation, love, death, iteration. Now, beyond that, I find it very difficult to summarize the story, but I found it poetic and sad or tragic. And what I found as a reader is that I was forced to experience the very human weakness that they have identified. So they somehow know that we're not going to be able to read this text, but they have to tell the story anyway. And as readers, we have to try to make sense of the story that's there. Ultimately, I think it's one big typographical experiment, and I found it quite fascinating. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I was blown away. This was one of these stories where I read it the first time and I didn't think very much of it. But as I continued to read it, and especially when I listened to it, in fact, I think that experience, I almost think it was a mistake to publish this in text because of the limitations of the media in describing the story. And Lightspeed, who published this, did this as part of their monthly podcast. And I would love to drop a link to that in our show notes so that people can read it if they want, or listen to it if they want, to experience it a little more closely to the way that the narrators intended.
Yes, you sent me the link for that, and I listened to that yesterday, and I was blown away by it. When I was reading the text version of the story, I was thinking to myself, how on earth would they do this in the audio format? Because I knew that they had audio versions of most of their fiction. So I was wondering, how on earth would they do this? And I kind of imagined multiple voices speaking in parallel. And that's what it is. And it is very good. It is a great audio thing. I did wonder, if you only heard the audio version, would you have any clue what was going on? And I think you would, but I think probably you get most out of this story by having it in both formats, because I think the text version informs the audio version and the audio version informs the text version. But it would be fascinating if anyone listening to this would care to listen to the story without reading it first, and then let us know what that experience was.
It reminded me of Arrival, in that, the learning of the language changed the person who learned the language.
Yeah.
It also reminded me of Where Oaken Hearts Do Gather by Sarah Pinsker that we did a couple of years ago, just as a layout experiment in non-traditional prose and media.
Yes.
So I'm finding I like this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it reminded me of some stories that come from the new wave period, the 1960s and the early 1970s, where authors were more inclined to do experimental typographical fiction. It also made me think about how we kind of understand extinct civilizations. So, for example, it made me think, imagine you were an ancient Egyptian who understood hieroglyphics and you wanted to convey your experience as an Egyptian to future civilizations. You would probably need to express yourself in terms of hieroglyphics, but you might be fearful that nobody would make sense of them. Now, it so happens we can understand hieroglyphics because at some point somebody found the Rosetta Stone, which enables us to translate them. But without the Rosetta Stone, the hieroglyphics mean nothing. And that's what this story made me think of, is that difficulty of communicating. You can draw an image and somebody can interpret the image and say, oh, that's a bird. But they can't necessarily get the meaning of bird as a symbol unless they have a Rosetta Stone. So that's what this reminded me of. It also reminded me of a Star Trek The Next Generation episode, which I think is The Inner Light, which is the one where Captain Picard lives an entire life in a single episode, because he's sort of taken outside of his body, and he's forced by some aliens to do this. But they're doing it to give him the experience of what their civilization was about, because it's now extinct. So there's so many levels to this piece.
Yeah.
I really like it.
It started getting me in the part of the story where it says, we know you can hear more than one sound at a time. So as you read this, please try and experience it the way we do, and run your eyes down the middle of the page and consume it all at once. And
You feel kind of manipulated by the author of the story, but drawn into it, sort of out of empathy for these aliens. So I think it's a remarkable piece of writing. This could just be a technical exercise, but I don't think it is. I think it's a very human story ultimately.
well, and introducing all the cool science fiction concepts in such a dense way. The idea of there's a civilization completely different from us in structure.
Yes.
And they're very short lived, because in one stanza it said, "We've spent several generations trying to communicate this to you." So yeah, just it's fantastic.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, what's next on the list?
The next one I've got here is Marginalia by Mary Robinette Kowal. Tell us about Mary Robinette Kowal, because you've met her, I believe.
I have met her. She is a multiple award-winning author, a professional puppeteer, has kind of become an incredible advocate for women in science and space because of the things that she has written.
Yes.
Probably best known for the Lady Astronaut series, which is an alternate history starting with a meteorite impact in Washington, D.C. in the 1950s and ending with the colonization of Mars.
Yeah.
This story was published in Uncanny Magazine in January 2024. It's the first of the 3 stories from Uncanny that come, and they are in sequence by issue. So there's one from January, one from March, and one from May, because they publish every other month.
Huh.
So Mary Robinette has a lot of talent. She writes science fiction and fantasy and alternate histories, most of which I have read. All of them that I have read, I enjoy, and I look at picking up the rest of her work. Marginalia is a short story set in a fantasy world, very familiar to people who would think about, standard Western fantasy. There's castles and hierarchy and classes and people who are lords and ladies and people who are servants. And the fantastic part of the story that we are concerned with is that there is a slug invasion. These aren't the kind of slugs that would destroy your lettuce. These are the kind of slugs that would first destroy your lettuce and then destroy your house and the entire surrounding forest. They're gigantic, they're acidic, they're ill-tempered. And our main character is Marjorie, and she is the daughter of a woman who used to serve in the Lord's mansion, but due to the onset of the tremors, had to step out of that role. And Marjorie also lost her job, so she stays and takes care of her mom and her 10-year-old brother. And a snail comes. The Lord goes to try and stop the snail from invading the lands. Her little brother wants to follow the Lord and see the glory of the battle in the horse. And that's the beginning of our story. The story is so delightful, I think that not spoiling it is to the reader's advantage.
Something I wondered as I was reading it is this part of a bigger world she's created, or is this a standalone story?
So I haven't read Mary Robinette's glamorous fantasies. I've read almost everything else from her short stories to novelettes, novellas, but I haven't got to the glamorous fantasies. It's possible it's part of that world, but I don't think it is. I think it's standalone.
So it's called Marginalia, and my best guess is that what this is a reference to is when you look at medieval manuscripts, you will often find that there are illustrations in the margins. And one of the strangest kind of illustrations that you will find is pictures of snails and people fighting snails. So I gather that that's what she's referring to here in calling it Marginalia. And there is some reference where I think the Lord Strange, talks to Hugh, the brother, and suggests that Hugh in the future might produce the Marginalia based on what he's witnessed. But at the same time, I think it's talking about people who are sort of on the margins of this society. So the main character, Marjorie, and her brother and their mother, they don't live up in the big castle with the kings and the queens and the princes. They're more sort of farm people or peasants, maybe. So maybe they're on the margins of this heroic world, but they're quite heroic in their own actions. So it's quite a nice little adventure story. And I think it manages to avoid being fairy tale, because it could so very easily be Shrek.
Oh, yeah.
I don't mean as a comedy, but it could be in that kind of fairy tale, medieval kind of a world. And I think it avoids doing that and is a bit more realistic. But well described, entertaining, and perfectly acceptable, I thought. But this will sound harsh, but I didn't find the story exceptional. And therefore, to me, I wouldn't dream of putting this on an award ballot, because to nominate something for an award, it's got to be exceptional rather than just fine, and I found this fine.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a limitation of the Hugo voting process, in that sometimes the exceptional is selected. I'm not widely read enough to know of all the other stories out there, and for the people who vote, if that is the most exceptional thing there, or if she's there merely because of her popularity.
Yes, it could be that. She's probably the most famous writer on this list, isn't she?
I think so. I think the next most popular one would be Arcady Martine,
Yeah,
because she's won multiple Hugos. Mary Robinette
yes.
has won a lot of awards, and so among people who vote, she's probably well known and well liked. I really enjoyed the story.
I didn't dislike it, but I just felt, okay, that was interesting. Next.
Yeah, there is something that in the story that I keep wondering about. There's a scene where Marjorie needs to go and find out what happened to her brother, because after Hugh goes and follows the Lord's horse comes back minus the Lord. And as Marjorie is getting all these materials that she might need, to follow her brother and take care of him, she turns around and finds that her mother has fallen out of bed. Now, this disease or condition she has, called the tremors, has almost rendered her non communicative. So she goes over to her mom. They have to go through this really arduous process to lift another grown woman and get her back into bed. But in that process, her mom says the word salt,
Yes.
which, we know for taking care of slugs and snails would be really, really useful. I have wondered, since I read this over a year ago, if Marjorie's mom used what little self-control she has left to fall out of bed on purpose to get Marjorie's attention to tell her about the salt.
Yeah. Like you, I was a bit puzzled by that and by that whole subplot involving the mother. And actually, that's part of the reason that I asked, is this part of a bigger story? Because it felt like there was a subplot there that maybe had some pre existence. Maybe this is going to turn into a novel in the future.
Yeah. It was inspired by experiences with her own mom, who I believe went through a similar loss of ability for self control. And
Okay.
I should have read and prepared a little more widely, because I'm fairly certain that she lost her mom recently. So it was a nice little, the way it ends, the idea that, these snails come and they change the forest as they go through it, leaving trails that hadn't been there before. I thought was a nice
Yeah.
little addendum at the end, and an honor.
And it's one of those things that could be comical because we've all seen slugs and snails, and to write about them in this serious way, not sort of po-faced seriousness, but it doesn't occur to you that this is a comedy as you're reading it, and it doesn't feel ridiculous. So I think that's quite an achievement in itself. Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, what's on your list?
I have Three Faces of a Beheading by Arcady Martine. And this one is from Uncanny. And according to the bio, Martine works on climate change mitigation and resilience planning. Arcady Martine is based in New Mexico and is a previous multiple Hugo winner. And this story, you may think that we've already discussed some meta stories. This one is a highly meta story.
Yeah.
This is about storytelling, and it's about how history is storytelling. It's about how interacting in a virtual world in a computer game is storytelling. And obviously, writing a short story about these things is storytelling. And this story is about all of that. And it centers around a beheading, which is first presented to us as if it's a real event. And then we think, well, no, we appear to have witnessed this through a computer game. And then we're made to question the very nature of history, because obviously history is about creating a narrative about the past.
Mm-hmm.
So it moves from this piece of straightforward fantasy literature that is the first few paragraphs of the story and very quickly brings you into this almost academic way of looking at what it is that storytelling does. And when I say academic, I mean this story has footnotes, which is rare in a science fiction story. I did not check whether the things referenced in the footnotes are real or whether they're made up. They all sound real.
They are.
Did you check?
I randomly picked one and spot checked it, and it's real.
Yeah,
The
brilliant.
part of Arcady Martine's bio that you didn't mention is that she is a Byzantinist.
Yes, I wasn't sure what that was. So,
Someone who has studied Byzantium in history.
okay.
And so I would assume that, she has subject matter knowledge, so to say.
Yes. So it has this kind of academic facade to it. Now, I can imagine that would put some people off. Didn't have that effect on me because I am an academic, and so reading academic papers is part of what I do or have done. And I found it quite an engaging way of telling this story. I got to the end of it, and I'm still not sure whether I appreciate this as a work of fiction or whether I simply appreciate this as a kind of an illustration of some academic points. But I quite liked it, but I don't know that I would ever sit down and read it again as entertainment. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I had the same thought. I've been learning, especially the last couple of years. I can consume things really, really quickly. I read very quickly, and a lot of times my initial impressions of things will change if I watch it again or read it again. And this is definitely one of those stories where I read it the first time and I thought, yeah, whatever. It's historical fiction, and you're doing this, and is it really science fiction? And then I read it a second and a third time, and I'm like, well, yeah, it's science fiction because they're individual participants in recreations of history, and they're bringing their own interpretations to history and using the storytelling part of the history to express unhappiness with the way things are going. And
So, on second reading, you were more favourably disposed to it.
yes, which would make the novel reading process for voting for the Hugos even more potentially difficult.
It certainly would. I don't know what else to say about the story, really. I mean, it's got Three Faces of a Beheading as the title, and we do witness multiple beheadings. And I'm not sure how seriously, as a reader, I'm supposed to take those beheadings, because I think the first one is slightly shocking because it's within the context of what appears to be a fictional narrative, but then we're kind of taken out of the story and we're looking at it from the outside. And as soon as you adopt that kind of academic standoffishness, it's difficult to feel engaged again within the story. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's why at the end of it, it leaves me feeling a little bit cold, and I appreciate it for what it's done technically rather than because it's moved me as a piece of fiction.
Yeah, it's a little cold and held at arm's length, so to say.
Yeah. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
The next one I've got is Why Don't We Just Kill the Kid in the Omelas Hole by Isabel J. Kim. And this one's from Clark's World, the only one from Clark's World on the ballot. And Kim is a Korean American based in New York City, works as a lawyer, and is a previous recipient of the Shirley Jackson Award. And this story, well, before summarizing this story, I think it is useful to know that this is a riff on a previously existing story. Were you familiar with that one, Colin?
I was. I'd actually had a chance to pick up the Ursula K. Le Guin short story a number of years ago, so I had it on my Nook.
It's riffing on the Le Guin story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. And I feel that we need to summarize both because I don't think you can appreciate the Isabel Kim story without knowing what it's commenting on.
Yes.
In brief, The Le Guin story has this place called Omelas, which is a city, a civilization, where everyone is happy. It's a kind of a utopia. Everyone's got everything they want. There is nothing bad in the world. But the only reason that this civilization can be so happy is that because in one corner of Omelas there's a kind of a prison cell, and in there is a single solitary child who is kept in abject misery. So the only way the civilization is able to thrive is by perpetually punishing this one, we assume, innocent child. If you live in Omelas, when you get to a certain age, I think it's maybe 13 or 14, you are told about the child for the first time. And when people are told about the child, some people disbelieve it. This can't possibly be true. That's bizarre. How can it be? Some people react more in the way of, I'm glad it's happening to that child and not to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a third category, which is people who, when they're told that this is how this world works, they just walk away. They don't know where they're going. They can't know what else is out there because all they know is Omelas. But they know they don't want any part of it. And so they're off. They're gone. So those are the ones who walk away from Omelas. So they're the people of the title of the story. And it's a very profound story. It's a very philosophical story. It has numerous interpretations. I've seen people interpreting it in a religious way. I've seen people interpreting it in a political way, as a statement on class, social class, and other things. So it's a story that's very ripe for interpretation. That's from 1973. That's the short story. And now we have Why Don't We Just Kill the Kid in the Omelas Hole by Isabel J. Kim. So having worn out my voice, Colin, would you like to summarize what this new story does?
Yeah. So in the original short story by Ursula K. Le Guin, you'd think there would be another class. And that class is of the people that are so upset that this is the case that even if it ruins the utopian existence of Omelas, is they're going to rescue the child or somehow stop this farce from continuing to happen. And in this new short story by Isabel J. Kim, the solution is they're going to kill the kid and proceed to do so. They kill the original kid and every other kid that's mentioned in the story. There are mentions of what happens when the kid is killed. There are earthquakes and the power fails. And I think there was a plague at one point. And yeah, out of the 6 stories, I think I liked this one the least.
Really?
Because one, I'm kind of against the killing of kids. I think that's wrong.
Well, yeah.
And nothing really comes of this. Omelas goes from a cycle of having kids in isolation who are, in abject misery for their entire lives and replaced by another child. There's a brief discussion about where are these kids coming from? Are they stealing them from other areas, or are they children from people in Omelas? But there's never any mention of an upset parent. Maybe the parents are complicit or something. But the thing that really grinds me about this is that it has a fundamental misunderstanding about the Omelas contract that we've discussed. And that is that this kid cannot even have a single word of comfort given to them. Otherwise, the contract is broken. So instead of rescuing the child and trying to stop this from happening, the solution is to kill the child.
Yeah.
And that extreme was not needed to break the Omelas contract.
Very good point.
So once I got to that point, I no longer understood what the point was in the story.
Right. Got ya. I take a slightly different view of it because I think it is also being satirical about our world, because a lot of the discussion and even the title of the story, Why Don't We Just Kill the Kid?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that is presented as this is what's taking place on social media. Now, obviously, when Ursula Le Guin's story was written back in 73, there was no such thing as social media. And I think one of the things that Isabel Kim is doing here is saying, look, this is a different world. Let's not just consider an alternative way of dealing with the Omelas situation. Let's consider what it would be like in our world, where everything is based around people getting outraged about things that 5 minutes ago they had no interest in, but now all of a sudden they're in outrage over this topic, whatever it is. And in this case, it's about Omelas. So to me, that's why some of the suggestions in this story are so glib, is because they are echoing or mirroring what we see on social media. Having said that, I see your point about how this is not even a solution to the Omelas problem, but I kind of think that whatever this author might have come up with as a potential solution to explore would prove to be equally invalid. So, killing the kid is not the solution. It's quite obvious that that is not the solution. And the fact that it takes them 4 or 5 kids to realise this is absurd. And so I took that as being part of the satirical point. But ultimately, this is just like hearing somebody doing a cover version of a song and changing the words. And you think, well, can I not just have the original story, please? Because it was a classic. What are you doing here? It's a bit like somebody deciding to do a remake of Citizen Kane.
There are similar talks about remakes of science fiction movies that are coming out in the next year or two. The first one is the remake of The Running Man.
Yeah.
And there was quite a bit of discussion about making a remake of Starship Troopers.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. And so the open question for the last one is, are they going to go back to the source material and adapt it? Or are they going to make another version of the Paul Verhoeven satire of the original materials?
Yeah. In both of those cases, at least we're talking about films which are not perfect. But if you've got something that is a classic, why would you do that? And this seems a bit odd with this story.
Yeah. Maybe as a satire, which I usually don't get the context of those from reading for one reason or another, that could explain why I didn't get the point of this story. Or it could be that, the idea that you're just going to continue killing children in order to stop a system that's going to keep putting children in holes. Yeah. The whole thing just seems broken in ways that I wasn't able to follow.
Yeah. This one did win the BSFA award, British Science Fiction Association award. So there is some following for this story out there, because the BSFA award is also a popularity contest.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that translates into Worldcon popularity. But I just wonder whether this one has gained some popularity because it is riffing on something that people already know.
Yeah, it says, much like the cold equations, where people have written about it, for it, against it, in alternation to it for decades. Omelas has spawned a large body of responses since it was written. And I think this just adds to it.
Yes. So in those terms, I'm quite happy with this. And I think I would read this one again, unlike some of the others on this list. But I don't think this is particularly original or exceptional, because other people have done this.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we move on?
Yeah.
The last one is called Stitched to Skin Like Family Is. And it's by Guy Vaux, and it's from Uncanny. Vaux is American, from Peoria, Illinois, winner of a previous Hugo. And this one is about a Chinese-American young woman who is hitchhiking across country in the 1930s, and she's trying to locate her brother, who appears to be ill. And as she travels, she repairs garments for people.
Mm-hmm.
And she has this strange ability. She can hear or feel the voices of the owners of the clothing that she touches. And she reaches the boarding house, which was her brother's last known address. I think she's attacked by the family members, some of whom are wearing the brother's clothes, and eventually she finds the brother's suitcase in the sort of up in the attic. She's able to sort of make final connection to her brother's consciousness, I suppose, through contact with the clothing. I didn't care for this, so I'd be very interested in your take on this one.
We reviewed one of her short stories last year that was also Hugo nominated called Fox Roads. And it's set in a similar kind of, 1920s, 1930s Midwest feel with someone of Asian descent and some incredible story that they go through based on mythology, or in this case I think it's close to the psionic ability psychometry, the ability to get memories or feelings or visions from touching various things.
Right, yes.
So based on those things, I like the setting, I like the story. It's really tragic because she's traveling to try and find her brother and going along with a suitcase full of the clothes from her dead parents so that they can all be kind of reunited one moonlit night when the magic fills them up and they can all be together again. So I like that. It was touching. I was horrified that there were people out there waylaying travelers for their clothing and other things they were carrying. But I think that's pretty appropriate for the time period.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I did like this idea of repairing clothes because that's something that doesn't happen so much nowadays. So it kind of made sense that this was sort of 1930s. Made me think of the Depression era, made me think of John Steinbeck. It felt as if it was part of almost the American literary tradition to be
Mm-hmm.
telling a story of this type. I just felt it a bit disappointing when we finally got to the end. I guess one of my problems with it, thinking about it, is that it's clearly a fantasy. And I don't know really what this strange psychic ability is that she has. I mean, well, I know what it is because it's described. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how she came by this ability. And I would have preferred it to be a science fiction story where there was some kind of explanation or rationalization for that. But instead, it's just left as this magical thing. So that places the story as sort of outside of my interest a little bit.
More fantastic than science based.
Yeah. But I did like the quality of the writing. I really like this sort of 1930s setting. She sort of hitchhikes on two occasions. Firstly, with a salesman, which again is something we don't have anymore. So she travels with one of those, and then she travels with a trucker who, to her surprise, is a black woman. Knowing that this was the 1930s, that made it an interesting bit of story at that point, especially when that trucker said, "I'm coming back through this town again tomorrow. I'll look out for you." And that made me think that there might be something more to come from that part of the story. But in fact, there wasn't any more. So it just felt like there was something missing.
I wondered if it was foreshadowing that she would survive the conflict that was going to come up.
Maybe, yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting set of stories. Because as we've been talking about, is the purpose of selecting the story to pick the things that you think are the best, or the things that you think are your favorites?
Could be either, and it could be both. And I'm guessing that everybody who nominates for these awards has a different motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people who vote will have their own motivations as well. I think if I were voting, not nominating, but voting, I think I would vote for something which was, in my terms, exceptional. And I think I would try to vote for something that was original as well. So for me, therefore, Marginalia wouldn't get my vote, even though it's a perfectly competent story, but it's not exceptional. And similarly, the Omelas one wouldn't get my vote because it's not exceptional and it's not original. I mean, it's original to a degree, but it's not wholly original. So, yeah, interesting. Have you actually voted now?
I have not. I like to do a whole bunch of the reading, and some of the things I'll read several times now before I start voting. But I would think kind of along the same lines, although I really like Mary Robinette's writing, and I think she does great work. And so I would think about voting for her story. And the Carolyn Yoakum story, I think, is phenomenal. Weighing those two back and forth is going to be hard. As much as Rachel K. Jones does great writing, I just don't feel like it is. And this is just my opinion, misspoken, misguided, personal, however you want to lay it out. I don't know if the horror aspect fits into science fiction, although the whole premise is very science fiction-y because you've got all
Yeah.
of the nanotechnology, you have spaceships, another planet, and then a society that would do this to people.
Yes. I have ranked the stories in my preferred order, and I'm just looking at the ranking now to see if I still agree with myself, because sometimes I do this and then afterwards I change my mind. So I'm going to run this by you,
Okay.
see what you think of this. At number 6, I've got Stitched to Skin Like Family Is by Nevo. Number 5, Marginalia by Mary Robinette Cole. Number 4, Five Views of the Planet Tartarus by Rachel Jones. Number 3, Three Faces of a Beheading by Arcady Martin. Number 2, Why Don't We Just Kill the Kid in the Omelas Hole by Isabel Kim. And at number 1, We Will Teach You How to Read, We Will Teach You How to Read by Caroline M. Joachim. From having discussed it with you, I begin to wonder whether I need to reread Stitched to Skin Like Family Is, because I think I may have glossed over the ending a little bit because I was getting a bit impatient with the story. So it might be better than I think it is. And certainly the Joachim story, to me, is the standout winner here. And the audio version absolutely confirmed that for me.
Yeah. Yeah, phenomenal. In the voters packet, that was included. And there were also copies of Five Views of the Planet Tartarus and Marginalia. And I really wish there had been copies of all the short stories audio in there.
Yeah. Just some sort of overall observations here. This is an all-female shortlist. I don't know if that is unique for the Hugos, but it's certainly rare to have an all-female shortlist. It's also an all-American shortlist.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think the last couple of years, I think we have had some representation from other countries. Obviously, there was a Worldcon in China not so long ago, and that both that year and I think the subsequent year, there were nominees from China.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've also had stories from elsewhere in the world. Whenever a shortlist for an award comes entirely from one country, it makes me wonder how widely people have been reading.
Yeah, all these came from highly popular, I think the term is semi-pro zines, where you can read all of the stories online for free right now.
Yes.
So unlike Asimov's or Analog, you would have to pay to read them. I do know that when you buy a Hugo's membership to nominate and vote, that gives you the right to nominate and vote for the current year and the following year. So we're seeing the complete fall off for all the Chinese people, unless they continue to buy like a remote membership or an attending membership. But last year was in Glasgow. And so there should be lots of people from Europe and the UK
Yeah.
who could. And where I was going in my head was it possible that all the magazines have a selection bias for American authors versus other authors? And I'm not going to believe that because
No. When we've reviewed these magazines, we have found them to be quite diverse.
Mhm.
It may be that they are still predominantly American writers contributing to these magazines, but I think it is significant that all of these magazines are free.
Mhm.
That's inevitably going to have an impact. I mean, just because something is free isn't going to get its stories out there, but these are magazines that are long-standing now. They've been running for years. They've built up an audience. So I think that brings an inevitable bias, but it's not necessarily unfounded. These are decent stories, all of these.
Yeah. It'll be interesting when they publish the full nomination results after the awards. We can have a look at who else was in the list that people nominated.
Yes. And of course, we know that the whole process is flawed because for some reason Science Fiction 101 isn't anywhere on the ballot.
I know.
What's gone on there?
Maybe we appeal to a different audience than the typical Hugo voter.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Are you ready for a quiz?
I was hoping you were going to say that. Yes, I am.
So last week, I almost had this quiz ready, but it wasn't all the way done yet. And I was inspired by the fact that It Came from Outer Space was nominated to be in the AFI Top 10 Science Fiction Film list, but didn't actually make the list. And I was wondering whether or not you knew off the top of your head what those top 10 science fiction films are. I'm going to give you some hints to help you with your guessing. So, probably the first thing to say is that this list was published in 2008. So there are movies that were great science fiction that are not on this list. And we can start at the top of the list or we can start at the bottom of the list at number 10. Which would you prefer?
Let's start at number 10.
Okay. Number 10 is a science fiction action comedy directed by Robert Zemeckis, released in 1985.
It's got to be Back to the Future.
It is. Very good.
Okay, good.
The next film is from 1956. The film was remade in 1978 and was adapted from a book by Jack Finney.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yes. This next film was released in 1991, and it was a film that was not accused of copyright infringement by Harlan Ellison.
It was not accused.
Yes.
Was not accused of copyright infringement. 1991.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
This film is really known for its incredible use of CGI at the time.
Oh, is it a Terminator sequel?
It is. It's Terminator 2.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Film number 7 is a Ridley Scott film from 1979, which was also deemed the 33rd greatest film of all time by Empire magazine.
Wow, it's got to be Alien.
It is Alien. I was quite surprised to see a horror film like that on the list.
Well, it's set in space, you know. It's got an android.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, film number 6 is a Philip K. Dick adaptation released in 1982. That's the film that was released, not the book it was based on.
Yeah. So that must be Blade Runner.
It is. This next movie at number 5 is a movie directed by Robert Wise and starring Michael Rennie.
Ah, that's The Day the Earth Stood Still.
It is. You know your science fiction.
I'm very surprised to see that sitting above Blade Runner.
Yeah. I would love to know the reasons for the rankings and a little bit for the selection. Okay, moving on. This adapted movie is the fourth of 4 adapted movies on the list. It was released in 1971, and it is Stanley Kubrick's first movie on the list.
It is probably A Clockwork Orange.
It is. Okay. The third movie is a Steven Spielberg movie from 1982.
1982, that is probably E.T.?
It is. Good job. You are 8 for 8 so far.
Phew.
The next one is a 1977 film that is the beginning of a major film and media franchise that has lasted over 50 years.
Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah.
As soon as you said 1977, Star Wars.
Yeah, when you talk about those eras, it's almost year on year if you know your science fiction movie release dates.
Yeah.
Okay. The most popular science fiction film, according to AFI...
2001, A Space Odyssey.
Exactly. It's on the top of everybody's list.
Yeah, I didn't need any clues there. I mean, I did not know that it was at number 1, but I knew it had to be in the top 10. And therefore, since you hadn't mentioned it up until now, it had to be at number 1.
And I did give a half clue earlier, saying that it was Kubrick's first movie, saying there must be a second Kubrick movie.
Yes, of course. So, has anything come out since 2008 that would change that?
Oh.
When was Arrival? Because that should be in there.
Arrival should be in there.
And I imagine some people would put some Christopher Nolan films in there.
Yeah, perhaps Tenet.
Yeah.
Interstellar.
Yeah. I mean, I personally wouldn't, but some people would. So I think it is due for a recount, isn't it? Because there have been some significant films since.
Yeah, I would say that even things like, I would say that It's not Continuum. It's Chronicle, which was an early film with Dane DeHaan, Michael B. Jordan, and another actor. Have you heard of this movie?
I'm not sure that I have.
Okay, that gives me an idea for another episode that we should do. Seth and I, between the two of us, keep what's called the list of shame, which
Right.
is movies that we each believe the other should have watched by this point or needs to watch at this point.
Yeah.
So maybe we could put together a quick list of movies that we don't think the other person has watched and that they really should, and maybe why.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. Hey.
Hey, and if we go that route, if our listeners want to send us some ideas that maybe neither Phil nor I have seen these movies, it's quite possible.
Interesting. Yes. Very good one. Yes, I like that. Let's do that. So did I get all 10?
You were 10 for 10.
Way.
At the risk of sounding gatekeepery, everyone should know about these 10 movies. They're incredible.
Oh, yes.
Are they the best of the best of the
Yes.
best? Maybe, maybe not, but they're certainly out of the most popular, and they're all very culturally significant.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, one item that is missing from that should be in there is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I seriously think that is a very strong science fiction film, and it has a cultural significance that some of the others that are in the top 10 don't have. And one that I would happily relegate a bit, maybe still keep it within the top 10, but not so high, would be A Clockwork Orange, which I think is somewhat overrated. It's good, but I'm not sure that it's top 10 good.
Yeah, it's the only movie I haven't seen on the list.
Oh, that should be on the, what did you call it? The Wall of Shame or something?
The List of Shame?
List of Shame.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to see it. It was on the OMSI Science Fiction Film Festival this year. But I don't know where I've learned about it, but I just have this casual disdain for it. My son Tim went and saw it and came back, and he had this comment. He said it had a lot of rape and nudity in it.
Yeah.
And when that's your first comment about a movie, it means that there's not a lot else to talk about. That's the most significant, noteworthy thing of it. So,
Yeah. Can't disagree. Do we have any past, present, or future items?
I have 3 quick ones, one of each.
Okay.
My past item is that author Keith Laumer was born in June 9th, 1925, almost exactly 100 years ago. And he is most well known for writing the Bolo series of military science fiction artificial intelligences.
Yes. Do you know when he died?
He passed away in 1993.
Okay. Interesting. I have a past item. Well, this is past/present because it's recently published, but it's a top 10 of science fiction series from the 70s, and this was published by space.com. Not a bad list. It's got a bit of American bias, although it does have it's got 2 British series in there. It's got Space 1999 and UFO, which are both British series. So whoever put the list together does know a fair bit, but they don't know everything because it's not the same as my top 10. But that's not what it claims to be. But I'll put a link in the show notes for that. What else have you got?
A future item, and that is a new book in John Scalzi's Old Man Warren series, has a release date, and it's September 2025. And the title will be The Shattering Peace.
Is that peace as in like war and peace, or is it peace like a piece of a broken thing?
As in the opposite of war.
Very good. And I have a present item, and that is that the chair of this year's Worldcon issued a statement a couple of days ago as we record this on how AI was used to help volunteers of Worldcon vet, and I put air quotes around that, vet potential participants in the program for the Worldcon. And this caused the inevitable uproar, all based around the idea that AI is evil. Everything AI does is based on stuff that's been stolen and used without permission. And so there are a lot of very disappointed people out there. I noticed that David Gerald, who is, I think, the voice of reason when it comes to AI things, he on Facebook took a more pragmatic view, because he's one of the few people who recognizes that you can use AI as a tool, as long as you don't allow the AI to make your decisions for you, and as long as there is a human process still leading the way. So to me, he's the voice of sanity, but there's been an awful lot of screaming out there, and I think it's something that the Worldcon doesn't need, because we've had a whole series of Worldcons with scandals attached to them, and we don't need another one.
Yeah. I mean, there's the scandal of using something, ChatGPT in general, when it's used to create things from scratch. And when those things are used to flood magazines and other places that it will pay for created works. And when the artificial things that are created are made out of other people's work without their permission or a respective copyright and are made of low quality, I think that's bad.
Yeah.
I think that people have too much of a trust in AI, and that might be the fault of science fiction. We spend too much time thinking about C3PO and R2D2 and not enough time thinking about,
HAL.
Yeah, or the AI from the Matthew Broderick movie.
Is it War Games?
It's War Games, yeah. They're programmed to create a response, regardless of the veracity of the response. And one thing that I found interesting was on a File 770 comment thread was somebody named Steve Wright, who said that he felt he was very glad he was not one of the people who was going to be on a panel, because Steve Wright's a pretty common name.
Yeah, because that was one of the issues. This was the bit that gave me a sort of a jaw drop moment, is that they said, don't worry about the use of AI, because all we did was put people's names in. We didn't put in any personal information other than people's names. And they're somehow expecting us to believe that you can just put in a name like Stephen Wright, and ChatGPT will give you correct information about that person. There will be hundreds of people with that name. So, yeah, it just seems bizarre to me. It's sort of a facepalm thing of, oh God, not another Worldcon scandal. Have you people learned nothing?
Well, and that's something that Tim asked me. He asked me whether or not there was a complete turnover in staff from Worldcon to Worldcon. And for the most part, that's the case. And so when you ask the question, don't these people learn anything? The answer is yes, but they're not the next people.
Yeah, that's right.
It's almost like there should be a document or something that gets passed. And maybe there is, and I just don't know about it. That gets passed down from...
Yeah, I think there is, actually.
There is?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so maybe it would say, don't use AI, or, if you use AI, disclose it up front so they can be discussed.
Yeah.
But I wonder if we'll see a bunch of amendments to the Worldcon laws this year to stop those kinds of things from happening.
Yeah, I can imagine there will be some. Yeah. That was my final item. Have you got another item?
That was also my last item, because I was upset that we weren't going to have a Worldcon in peace.
So are you physically attending the Worldcon this year?
That's the plan today. I'm not as optimistic or altruistic about the use of AIs and LLMs to do work. I work with people who have lost money and have had their work stolen for the use of making AIs. And I'm not very happy about this decision. One person has already withdrawn their work from consideration for the Hugos. It was a work in the Best Young Adult category for the Lodestar.
Wow.
And so those are discussions that my wife and I are having right now, whether or not we're going to continue to attend and support this.
What a suspenseful note on which to end.
Stay tuned next time where we may make a decision. We'll find out. Thanks for listening.
We're Phil Nichols and Colin Cuskey.
Our music is from Purple Planet at purpleplanet.com.
Please visit our website at 101sf.blogspot.com,
where you can support us by buying us a coffee.
And you can find us on Facebook and Blue Sky. So see you next time.